Excuse me. I'm just going to sit here for a couple of minutes and see if Facebook will work its magic and get us some people to join in on the live video. I do not feel well. This is a topic that I have received several calls about from people just needing some advice on how to support a friend or family member, and not really knowing how. So I thought it was a great topic for today. It's one of our taboo subjects when we think about mental health. So I'm just going to give a couple more minutes to see if Facebook will build us an audience. Okay. I think we waited long enough. We do have a couple of viewers, so I'm going to go ahead and get going. Hopefully, other people will join in on the discussion. But tonight we are talking about suicide. And there are several topics that I want to cover tonight. One, I just want to help people to have a basic understanding of why people are suicidal. I also want to talk some about the warning signs, as well as some common misconceptions associated with suicide, as well as ways in which you can be supportive to a friend or family member, to help them or to help prevent suicide. So I invite you all to ask questions. If you are an educator, if you are a parent, if you, you know, whatever role that you are in, I want you to understand that you could easily encounter people in your daily lives who are suicidal. you might not expect it at all. And in fact, you could be living with someone who is suicidal, and it's really important that you know what to do, how to approach that person, and what might be some of the best ways to be supportive and helpful to them on their journey towards healing. Okay, so it looks like we have 3 viewers at least right now. So I'm going to go ahead and start talking about suicide. The World Health Organization estimates that approximately 1 million people die each year by suicide. Okay, and that's just an estimate. And so I think that when we hear that number, 1 million people each year, I think that should really help us to be attentive and recognize suicide as being a really serious issue that we no longer need to skirt around, we no longer need to avoid, we really need to address. Okay. Other things to know about suicide is for people who attempt suicide, it is important to understand that it doesn't necessarily mean that they want to die. It means that they want relief from the chronic pain or the chronic depression, the chronic feelings of hopelessness, some of the symptoms that we'll talk about in just a little bit. But it means that they want relief and they don't really see another way out. Okay. Another thing that's important to know about people who are suicidal is it's not that they don't want to ask for help, right? It's sometimes that they have asked for help in indirect ways, but that ask or those requests have kind of fallen on deaf ears, or is that they cannot bring themselves to ask for whatever reason. Maybe the people do not seem safe to them. Maybe they are fearful themselves. Maybe they, want to protect those around them and not let them know. There are lots of reasons why someone may not want to ask. Okay, but that does not mean that help is not wanted. It doesn't mean that they don't want your help. Okay. And then lastly, just in terms of our basic kind of foundational understanding of suicide, it is important to know that just because someone engages in suicidal behaviors does not mean that they do not want to live. Okay. It doesn't mean that. And it doesn't mean just because you bring it up doesn't mean that you are going to plant some seed in them that makes them now become suicidal. So hopefully that makes sense. So just our foundational or basic understanding, about 1 million people die by suicide each year. It is important to know that people who engage in suicidal behaviors or die by suicide is not that they don't want to live. It is that they don't want to feel the pain that they are experiencing and they want relief. Please also know that it's not necessarily that they do not want to ask for help, and that it's not necessarily that they don't want help. And then the other thing to remember is just by talking with them, you are not planting the seeds. So if you see some warning signs, if you're concerned about someone, thank you, Mimi, for the hearts. If you are concerned about someone, go ahead and talk with them and try to have a conversation with them. You will not in any way encourage them to engage in suicidal behaviors. So hopefully that kind of sets the tone and helps us all to have this basic understanding as we now try to, talk more about some of the signs and misconceptions associated with suicidal behavior. So, any questions so far from anyone? Let's see. For whatever reason, I can't see the full screen. But let's talk about some common misconceptions about suicide. A lot of times people say that just because people are talking about suicide does not mean that they'll do it, right? Sometimes people oftentimes say, I'm trying to see your comment, Mimi, for whatever reason, I'm having a hard time seeing everything. Yes, there are a lot of people out here who need to know this. We oftentimes hear people say, I don't believe that was a suicide. That person would not do that. Or that person, everything was going well for that person. And I think it's really important to know that a lot of times people are suffering in silence. and they choose this option to allow themselves to have some relief. And it really oftentimes is the only option that they believe that they have. But people who talk about suicide won't really do it. Well, that is false. Oftentimes, people who are talking about suicide are people who are talking about, I won't be here this time next week or this time next month, or people who are saying, you know, you're going to miss me when I'm gone. It's not necessarily that they're trying to be manipulative, okay? It's not that they're trying to manipulate you. It oftentimes could be them crying out for help. It could be an indirect way in which they are asking for help. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they are trying to be manipulative, okay? Another thing to remember is that oftentimes you'll hear people say, well, people who engage in people who attempt suicide, it's oftentimes how you hear it spoken about, are crazy. False. Okay. And so one, crazy is derogatory, but even if people are using the word crazy as synonymous with psychosis, it is important to know that people who are suicidal are oftentimes severely depressed, but that does not mean that they are experiencing any delusions or hallucinations. Could they be? Yes, but that doesn't mean that they are. They are experiencing chronic emotional pain. Okay. Oftentimes you'll hear people say, well, there's nothing really that I could do. You know, if a person is suicidal, then they're going to do it anyway. There's nothing I can do to stop them. And while it is important to know that we don't want you to blame yourself, but we do want you to do what is within your control. I hope you realize that just by talking with someone, just by opening up the door with someone who is having suicidal thoughts, you are allowing them to release themselves of some of the kind of pent up feelings and thoughts that they've been having, if they feel like they can confide in you and tell you that. Okay? So yes, there is something you can do that can help to prevent suicide. Okay? It's also important to know that people who die by suicide oftentimes do seek help. You'll hear people kind of speak about it as, well, they never told anyone, they never asked for help. Oftentimes people do seek help, but for various reasons, their request for help can be overlooked by friends and family, and sometimes even medical professionals. Okay? And sometimes it's just the way that they talk about it. It could be that they're speaking about it in indirect ways, and it may be overlooked. Okay. And lastly, the misconception that I talked about earlier, just in building our foundational understanding of suicide, just by talking about it or asking questions is not going to make someone want to engage in suicidal behaviors. It's not going to make someone want to die by suicide just because you are talking with them about it. Okay, so those are some common misconceptions about suicide and suicidal behavior. All right, any questions so far with that part? We talked about kind of building our foundational understanding. We've also talked a little bit about some misconceptions. And if there are no questions on that part, I want to move into talking about some signs that you may notice. Just going to see if I can give people a minute. I wish I knew who was in the chat. For whatever reason, I don't see everything today. But I didn't see any questions pop up, so I'm going to keep going. All right. So I am going to throw this question out here for you all to see if I can get some people to respond. What do you think might be some warning signs of suicide? If I could get the people who are in here so far to kind of post what you think might be some warning signs, some suicide warning signs. Go ahead, don't be shy. I know you all have some thoughts out there. And I know you all know. Yes, Brittany. Isolation for sure is one. Yes, Ryan. And it's so nice to have you in the group, in the live. Thanks for joining us. Absolutely. So making plans to pass away. We call it kind of like getting their stuff in order, taking care of business, giving away personal items. So it's awesome that you all already have some understanding of some behaviors that you would see people engage in who are suicidal. Okay. So one of the first ones that I want to discuss is you'll oftentimes hear people who are suicidal talk about suicide. They may speak about it in very indirect ways. They may speak about it as when I'm gone or, when I'm not around anymore. But they may speak about it in very vague kind of terms, or they may even say, you'll be better off without me, right? Or I'd be better off dead, or things would be so much better when I'm no longer here, right? But they may speak about it in very vague terms. But talking about death or suicide, you may hear them write about it, or kind of you may feel like their thoughts may be kind of um, in a concerning way, maybe preoccupied with death or dying. Okay, that's another sign. Um, Another sign could be that they are seeking out means to engage in suicidal behavior. So they're seeking out guns, or they're seeking out knives, or they are seeking out medications, or they are stocking up on things to be able to help them carry through their attempt. Okay. Another one is they may be very hopeless and going along with what Brittany said. They may isolate themselves from their friends or loved ones. They may stop engaging in behaviors that they once used to engage in. You may see some signs of depression, which we talked about yesterday. So things like changes in appetite or changes in sleeping patterns, or not engaging in daily activities that once brought them joy. And then you oftentimes might hear them start to say goodbye to people and to pets, right? And along with that, they may start getting things in order, or taking care of business. So, like Ryan said, giving away items, or preparing a will, or looking for important documents and trying to put them in a place where friends or loved ones could easily access them. Writing down their, social media passwords and online account passwords. You may see them give away clothes that they really love, but they can still wear. Give away really prized possessions, or start talking with people about, when I'm no longer here, this is yours. And so you may hear some of this language that, if you listen carefully, might allude to them making plans to die by suicide. Okay. And so with that, it's like they're saying goodbye. It's like they are preparing themselves and preparing you for them to no longer be here. They may also engage in some self-destructive behavior. Um, maybe having lots of sexual partners, or drinking a lot, or doing drugs. They may engage in self-destructive behavior, and a lot of that engaging in self-destructive behavior stems from their self-hatred a lot of times, or self-loathing. Um, and then one of the ones that I think is oftentimes overlooked because it can be very deceiving is they may have this sense of calm before it all happens, calm and maybe even happiness before it happens. And that is sometimes where a lot of friends and family members are thrown off because they've seen someone who's been struggling with chronic depression, and then all of a sudden it's as if it lifts, right? And their affect is better, and they, now are talking more, and they want to go and participate with us more. And sometimes that can mean that they are now in a place where they have accepted that they are going to die by suicide, and they may feel happy and relieved because they know that emotional relief is coming soon. Okay, so that's one that oftentimes throws people, or when you hear them talk about it after someone has died by suicide, they'll oftentimes talk about it as, but they were so much better. Recently, they were so much better. Well, sometimes that's that calm before the suicide. Okay, so hopefully that's helpful so far in terms of just some warning signs associated with suicide. And now we're going to talk about, I think, what brought a lot of you here is how can we support someone who is suicidal? What can we do in our day-to-day lives to be supportive of them and to help prevent suicide? I think that's our ultimate goal, okay? And one of the first things you can do goes back to what I said with understanding suicide and common misconceptions. One of the first things you can do is to talk with them about suicide. And so the way that you want to do that is you want to start out by saying things like, I've noticed you haven't been yourself lately, or I've noticed that you have been withdrawn lately, or I noticed that you have not been talking much lately. Whatever it is, you want to tie it to your observations, tie it to their behaviors, tie it to their affect and your experiences of that. Okay. And then when you're doing that, you want to ask some questions along with it. And some of these can be really pointed questions that require yes or no answers, right? When did you begin to feel like this, right? Have you thought about getting any help? But then some are more open-ended. How can I best support you? What can I do to be supportive of you? Okay. I'm going to look over here. It looks like we have a couple more comments. Yes, reaching out. Sometimes they are reaching out and calling for help. And sometimes we misinterpret that as attention-seeking behavior just for the sake of having attention. Well, sometimes it is attention-seeking behavior, but they have very clear intent behind it. It's a cry for help. They want to live, and so they're asking people for help. You can also let people know that they are not alone, and that you want to be supportive of them. You want to acknowledge their feelings. So if they're telling you they feel alone, acknowledge that. And you want to be able to let them know that you are there. You also want to be able to try to encourage them and help them understand that although they may not feel like it right now, that these feelings of chronic pain, chronic emotional pain, and chronic emotional distress may likely change in the future if they could just hold on. Okay. It's I told someone recently that if you've ever been with someone who's been in a lot of physical pain, either, immediately after a car accident, or they're struggling with an illness like cancer, or they've had a major surgery and they're just in a lot of physical pain. Oftentimes, it's really easy for us to hold their hand or to be with them and connect with them and encourage them to hold on, encourage them to keep fighting, right? Encourage them to stick it out. In a lot of ways, those skills can definitely transfer to working with someone or being with someone and comforting someone who is struggling with suicidal thoughts, or someone who's engaging in suicidal behaviors. Okay. You want to really be yourself. When you're having this conversation, you do not need to feel like a mental health expert. You do not. You just want to be yourself. You want to be that friend, that loved one, that family member that they can confide in. You really want to listen, okay? You're not there to give a lecture. You're there to listen. You are there to comfort, and you want to be empathetic to that person, Okay, you want to try, although you may not ever be able to understand the pain that they are in, you want to help them to know that you want to help them and you want them to feel better. Okay, you also want to try, this is difficult, right? But you want to try to instill some hope. Again, it's kind of the same way as if you were working with someone who is in a lot of physical pain, helping them to feel more hopeful, helping them to be more future oriented and understand that this pain or this experience is temporary. And I just need you to hold on, right, until we can get you some help or until things get better. Well, it's similar here. You want to encourage them to hold on. You want to try to tell them, encourage them, I should say, to be hopeful. And understand that this is temporary. Okay. You do not want to promise them that you're going to keep this information confidential. In fact, that's the last thing you want to do, okay? Because you may indeed need to tell someone, all right? And we'll talk about kind of how you can gauge that. But I would always encourage you to always err on the side of seeking professional assistance, seeking professional help, okay, with and for that person. All right. So you don't want to swear yourself to secrecy. You do not want to say, whatever you tell me stays here. I will not tell anyone. Right. You don't want to do that. And plus, that's too much of a burden for you to bear as well. Let me look. We have some comments. Some people feel as if no one cares and if there is no hope. Exactly. A lot of times that is why they feel like it would be better for them to just not be here. Yes, 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 and yes. So other things you can do. So I talked with you about, just being supportive, right? And talking with them. Remember that just by talking with them, you're not encouraging them to do this. You're not planting a seed. You're not going to give them kind of an option or a way out when they weren't previously thinking about it. If someone was not contemplating suicide before you go to them and you ask them and you tell them about changes in behavior, you tell them about your concerns, guess what? They're not going to start just because you go to them. Okay. So the next one is you want to understand that this is a crisis and you want to know how to respond. Okay. So there are a couple of things. Hey, Sherelle, there are a couple of things to keep in mind for people who are suicidal to help you to be able to gauge kind of where they are. Okay. And I debated on whether or not to go into these, but I think the questions are pretty simple, right? And so one is you want to know if they have a plan. All right. So you want to know if they have a plan. Do you have any way in which they were planning on carrying out this suicide? Right. The other is you want to know if they now have means to carry out that plan. If the plan was through hanging, if the plan was through overdosing, if the plan was through drowning themselves, you want to know, do they have the means to be able to do that? Okay, so any kind of physical items that they might need to be able to carry that plan out. Okay, so do they have a plan? Do they have means? The next one you want to know is, do they have kind of a set day or time in mind? And then lastly, you want to know, do they intend to do it? And I know that last question kind of throws a lot of people off. You're thinking, okay, well, someone is telling me they have a plan and they have means and they have a time set, but they don't really have any intention of doing it. You have to understand that sometimes for people who are chronically depressed or in chronic pain, they may have kind of thought through the plan and the means and when they would do it, but they may not have really decided or committed to their intention to die by suicide. Okay, so there is a difference. Okay, and then lastly, we're going to talk about just offering some help. Okay, if you know of someone who is suicidal, you want to be able to offer some help, and you want to be able to offer help over the long run, not just temporarily. Okay, so first you want to start out by helping them to seek some help, right? Offer to go with them to an appointment with a mental health professional. You want to also really encourage them to have a safety plan. And if they go and see a mental health professional, a safety plan will more than likely be developed in that appointment, okay? But you want to be able to offer yourself and your contact information in the development of that safety plan. And that just really means that this person who is suicidal has created a plan that says that before engaging in any suicidal behaviors, they are going to engage in some other help-seeking behaviors, okay? And one of those things could be to contact you, okay? You don't want to only be the only person on that list, though. You want to have multiple people there because for whatever reason you may be unavailable, right? So you want to encourage them to get some professional help. You also want to encourage them to follow up with treatment. Just because they may start feeling better, you don't want them to drop out of treatment prematurely. You want to offer help in the long run, so be on that safety plan. Encourage them to engage in some different fun activities with you. So you all have heard that exercise releases endorphins and thus relieves stress, right? That's why we feel better. We feel less tense whenever we've engaged in physical activity. You want to invite them to do things like that. Invite them to spend time with you and keep on inviting. Just because they turn you down 10 times, right, doesn't mean you stop. Remember, that is a warning sign of suicide. It's this isolation, right? So you want to be persistent and keep inviting them, okay, and supporting them over the long haul. Another thing to remember, if you are living with someone who is suicidal, or if you're not living with them, but you can go into their home, you really want to make sure that the means to engage in suicidal behaviors are removed from that home. Okay, so pain medications, guns, a lot of knives. You want to limit their access to different materials that could be involved in their plan and their that could take away their means, essentially. Okay. So I think I'm just going to do a recap. There was one more thing I really wanted to talk about, and that's just, I'll quickly talk about this. These are some risk factors for people who are suicidal. Anytime someone has a family history of suicide or suicide attempts, that elevates their risk. Anytime someone has previously attempted suicide, that also elevates their risk. Anytime someone has experienced a lot of trauma, or abuse, that also elevates their risk. Okay, so trauma, abuse, family history, previous attempts, anytime they're dealing with a current stressor, major life stressor, that also elevates their risk. Mental illness will elevate their risk. Okay, so particularly when we're thinking about alcohol and drug abuse, psychosis, those things will elevate their risk as well. Okay, so I really hope this has been helpful for those of you who are able to tune in. I am going to quickly just do a recap. I hope I haven't missed anyone's comments. For whatever reason, I'm not seeing all the comments, but thank you all so much for your support first. And for me, this goes well beyond me. It's not about me, okay? This is about increasing mental health awareness, decreasing stigma, and being a support person for those who you all know and love, okay? So if you would share the video, if you would use these tools to reach out to someone you've been concerned about, especially if you've been concerned about their emotional well-being, I want you to be able to go forth and use these live videos, use the information in a really practical way. Okay. So let me just give a really quick recap. We started out by just kind of laying the foundation, understanding what are we talking about when we're talking about suicide. And I gave you one statistic, and that is just that the World Health Organization estimates that 1 million people die by suicide each year. Okay. Some other things you need to know is just by talking with someone about it does not plant the seed, does not make them think that this is an option for them if they weren't already thinking about it. Okay. The other thing you need to know is just because someone attempts suicide does not mean that they want to die. Okay. It means they want relief from the pain, from the emotional pain that they are experiencing. And also, I don't want you to believe that it's not that they don't want help. Okay, a lot of times it's that they don't know how to ask for it, or they've been asking, but it's been falling on deaf ears. And maybe they've been asking indirectly, right? So that was kind of our basic foundational understanding. We also talked about some warning signs. And so you all were, talking about isolation, kind of preparing for suicide, preparing for their death, giving away items, being withdrawn, not engaging in some of their daily activities, kind of some classic signs of depression, these overwhelming feelings of hopelessness, being consumed with talking about death and dying or when they're no longer here. All of those are really signs. Thank you, son. Thank you so much, Mimi. And then we moved on to talking about some ways in which we can help to prevent suicide. And one of the first ways I said is just by talking about it, meaning it's really important to open up the door, to listen to them, to be empathetic, to ask open-ended questions and pointed questions, to understand whether or not they have a plan, means, intent, time, to be supportive of them in the long run. So go with them or offer to go with them to seek professional help. Make sure that they have a safety plan, and you offer to be one of those contacts, inviting them to different social events over and over and over again, especially ones that involve physical activity, right? You can go for a walk, you can go to the gym, you can go and just play a game. Laughter really helps as well, and be persistent in those efforts. You also could continue to check on them, right? Continue to be someone that they can confide in. You don't want to swear yourself to secrecy. And so those are just some of the ways in which you can be supportive. Okay. I really hope this has been helpful for you all. If you think of questions, please let me know. I'm going to comment and post some resources in just a little bit that I think will be helpful for people. And we will be back tomorrow. Tomorrow's topic is talking about mental health in the Black community. So I hope to see you all there. Take care.